Okay, so my name's Mark. I'm an addict, and I'm here. Hello, guys. How you doing, troops? So I'm here with Russell today, Michael and Tosca, and I think the theme for me, you know, I was thinking on the way when I was on the motorbike. I was thinking, what are the thing? What is the sort of topic that would probably be useful for us all, and what would we all want from it? And I guess later recovery, or just recovery in general, and what happens in late. I mean, I'll maybe start with an example. An example is I had a client this morning. I was speaking to him, and I could see that at some point I said a few things that I could see caused a bit of a change in him, and I said at the end of the session, I says, listen, is that session, was that okay? Do you feel that you're getting, you know, from the sessions? And he says, well, it's a bit disjointed. And as soon as he says it's a bit disjointed, I could feel inside the child inside going, oh, I'm doing it wrong, the imposter syndrome. God, what are you doing? You're winging it, you know, like this sort of internal criticism. So, knowing also I've got an illness that speaks to me continually is not enough as well, because although I've been in recovery now 27 years, you know, I've got a sponsor, I work the steps to the best of my ability, really, not sometimes my willingness. Even all the way here, this was going on in the back of my mind, was going, I wonder what he's going to stop this, he's going to do this, and then also the prestige, because he's you know, he's some guy that's quite, you know, he's quite famous in some ways. I then started to say, oh, I'm not liked, and not liked is probably not the term, but there's something about I'm not doing it right, and then my illness starting to berate me, and that, as we say, you know, as Mark Twain once says, I've gone through many terrible things in my life, most of which never happened. As my illness manifests in my thinking, and although nothing's actually happened, I've created this whole scenario that then I can act on, and which creates this harmony, and you know, so maybe that's maybe useful. I as I say, I'm 27 years. I came into the programme with nothing, came out of prison, Belmarsh prison, just at the end, and you know, a life really, synopsis, really starting to use drugs, starting to sell drugs, starting to smuggle drugs, lose it all. And then in desperation and despair, ego deflation, and then I reach out for something which in a moment in St Thomas's Hospital in 1996, I cried out in my spirit, really, and if there's anything out there, please, just desperation, and a few things happened, and then I wound up in prison. So, and then I got recovery. So it's And since, because my father was in recovery and he was an alcoholic, I've stayed with it since that time, and I've had a healthy fear of this. Because in rehab they used to say, if you do not have respect for this illness, it'll screw you, it'll have you. You know, it's like, and they used to say things like, there's a spiritual path and a psychopath. Which one are you going to choose? And so you need a programme. So I'll leave it there and then see what happens from here.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
That made a lot of sense. It was good.
I like to mark Russell. I'm an addict and an alcoholic, and I feel like what you said at the beginning about how long-term recovery, as we're all over 20 years. I perhaps felt at the beginning that there would be if not graduation, ongoing gradual improvement. But I found like the last year of my recovery, perhaps the hardest, and not just because of obvious external events, although there have been like a lot of external challenges. I still feel like as well as significant life events like challenges in the family, challenges in working life, even things like you described, which I imagine in your line of work is pretty common, like feeling, oh no, I don't know if I've done the right thing with this client, particularly as you are a maniac and should be trusted. Should be trusted.
Well, I was just waiting for it coming. It's coming anytime.
Because I mean, like as well as pretty major things, they're just to say like the everyday things that come up if you're working as a member of a team. It's not just things that I've had challenges. My little boy was in Great Ormond Street when he was first born, had heart surgery and stuff like that. Had a lot of challenges with like the stuff that happened in public, obviously.
Sure.
But like what I feel is that like that I've been like dragged by my throat closer to God. Like
Absolutely.
that every time I think that there is some I have like some magnetic propensity to think that I can solve my life's problem through sort of prestige or some kind of material, worldly or sort of fleshly thing. And I don't even notice I'm doing it because I feel like I had a kind of spiritual awakening like anyone does at the beginning of recovery, the spiritual awakening of, oh, well, I'm not going to be drinking or taking drugs no more. That's over and I'm going to have to be all right with that. And the kind of fear and dread and awe and hope that comes. And then since then there have been improvements, but I'm just surprised by the fact that this has been like such a hard time in recovery. And like all of us are aware that men with 15 to 20 to 30 years ending their own lives, and women as well, but just men come to mind. I can think of a few. So yeah, there doesn't seem to be like, when people say the road gets narrower and like the gate is narrow and all of that, I just wonder what you feel about that, for example, Michael, Tosca as well, of course, but like that as you get deeper into recovery, it seems that not only what kept me clean and sober yesterday won't keep me clean and sober today. It almost feels to me like I have to do more, particularly around step 11, conscious contact, prayer and meditation, particularly around 3, handing it over to a higher power of my own understanding, and the need to have defects of character taken away and humbly asking for that. Those aspects, in particular the program, seem to be really increasing for me. I wonder what you feel.
Well, it's funny, on a different level, obviously, and my heart goes out to you for a lot of this stuff because I've done things that have caused a lot of pain to a lot of people, by my behaviour. The narrower the gate is, for me, it's because I became a Christian. I'm not religious. I really am not religious. And the way I got introduced to it was by a spirit which was powerful. I need power. I need something to change me. And I don't want to harp on about my health. I'm going through a cancer thing at the moment. And it's really humbled me. And it's made that beat my desire to want what I feel I need, because a lie. A total lie. I don't need what that thing thinks it needs. Affirmation, sex, money, an argument. I used to go looking for arguments to satisfy that sort of heartbeat in me. And where I've had to sit on my own, I've had a tough 10 years. And where I've sat on my own for the last 2 years out of choice, the gate that was really narrow, I've got through it because nothing is important other than, a lot of things are important. I've got 4 girls and 8 grandchildren. I love them dearly. But what's important is that I'm not facing death. I don't think I'm going to die. We all got to die. But it whispered in my ear. I've had lung cancer, now I've got it in my brain, but it's very small. And I'm trusting in God. I have a relationship with God, and the addiction, and mine are similar to yours, as they are with this young man, as they are with this young man. I've caused havoc by not keeping my strides in place. But, whatever. And people like we mentioned earlier with the church, I don't see them as religious. Religion's not for me. It's about a spiritual contact with something that can heal me. The Bible says in Romans 12:2, and I don't want to get off spirit of religious here or try to convert anyone, but it says, and I was a naughty boy. I was a drug smuggler, a top end.
Right, someone should explain that. I can't do podcasts with drug smugglers. What is it? Oh, Christ. What's going on in here?
Cut that. So it it was an addiction. You know, it was addiction that I had to be grandiose because I felt so small inside. I was so frightened. I was sexually abused as a kid. So all that stuff that grew with me, and this macho boy who looked like he was a tough boy was as weak as anything. I was really not well in here. And as I've come through life in a distorted fashion by not respecting the addicts, and it's the work of the enemy. So I believe it's the work of the devil. But it's not about being clean and drinking drugs. I think that was the easy part for me. It's about being clean from who I am. You know, what do I really? Am I being manipulative, cunning, or do I really love myself enough to love you? So the narrow gate became sort of a bit wider when I got unwell. I didn't have to impress anybody. I wasn't showing off anywhere. I wasn't wanting you to like me. I sat with my faith, this is Jesus. I find him a character of that man, a warrior. You know, he was a tough boy. He didn't sit down to have a wee. He was a tough kid. And where I've sat quietly with him and gone, you know, what is all this about? I got peace. And I realised that I didn't have to be on this sort of sideshow bit, am I doing all right? I was allowed to sit on my own, and I really took it personal. I didn't want anyone on the phone driving me mad. You're right, you're right. Whereas before I'd have liked that affirmation. And in a way, I don't know how it works, but it's simplified my insanity. It's simplified it in a way that I found peace, and I quite enjoy it. And the heartbeat or the permutation of the noise has got really quiet, and I quite like it. I never thought I could be on my own. I had to have a crowd of people around me. I had to be this, I had to be that. I was a really broken child, and I don't feel broken today. I feel a lot better. So thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you.
Hello, boys and girls. Yeah, my name's Tosca, and I am a drug addict, and like the three gentlemen around the table, I really do identify. And, you know, we're talking about being in recovery a bit longer, and Russell talking about the road getting narrower, and Michael talking about finding a faith. And I suppose that, you know, addiction for me, I was a window licking crackhead. That's what I call myself. Do you know what I mean? I'd sit looking out of windows, thinking that the police were in my hallway and about to kick the door off. You know, and it's kind of what I didn't realise is whilst I was doing that, I was trying to fill some sort of hole. And really, when I discovered drugs, you know, I took all drugs, started smoking crack, and instantly thought I've fallen in love. This is it. This is going to make it work. And I suppose the if I analyse what my addiction is the thing that I think that when I get it, it's all going to be all right. Yeah, and so what's happened is that through my 20 odd years, and I'm cleaner than Mark, by the way. I have to say, I am the cleanest person here, but we won't get to that. Yeah, I always let people know that. Is that, you know, it's become. You know, and me and Michael were driving here, and you know, and people talk about process addictions and this sort of stuff and the rest of it, you know, and it's kind of it's morphed into the thing that I think that when I get it, it'll all be all right. So, is it this bird? Is it this car? Is it this? Is it that? And you know, and you quoted the Bible. I don't know anything about the Bible. I come from a really religious family, but I kind of turned that bit down. But what I do, okay, well, I'm just saying, you know, I can remember. Okay, I can remember. I was sitting with a fellow in LA, right, and his name's whatever his name is anyway. He's a songwriter, and he draws up in this big Range Rover, and we're sitting in a place called the News Cafe on Robertson Boulevard. And he sweeps in. He gets out as a beautiful young girl. And I'm like, wow, this geezer's really got it. So we're sitting around, we're having tea and coffee, and I sort of, you know, and I'm desperate to ask him about the girl. Because clearly, if I had a girl like that, if I had a girl like that,
okay. You think you're okay?
I'd be okay. I'd have the Range Rover, blah, blah, blah. It'd all be okay. And it's all going to work. How'd you get it? And he looked at me and went, what did he say? He went, some fella in the Bible, right? I've forgotten what his name is. Who's the guy in the Bible who had all the riches in the world?
Solomon.
Solomon,
He said to
the
me,
wise man, yeah.
He said to me, Solomon had all the riches in the world and it wasn't enough. He said, I'm a born-again Christian. And he said, she's just my friend. I've taken her to church. And I'm celibate and I've not had sex for 4 years. But what I realised in that moment was that when he said, Solomon had all the riches in the world and it wasn't enough, it really connected with me. I kind of know that, right, at a real fundamental level, that none of this gear that I fantasize and think about, is ever going to fix me.
Yeah.
And, and in the past 6 months, a couple of guys here know I've been met with real challenges. Someone's accused me of stealing £450,000.
Yeah.
Where is it?
I've been challenged in a way that I've never been challenged before. And what I love about the beauty of the program is that I have been able to cope with it. There is something about, there's something about the kinship. There's something about sharing other people. There's something about, me, Mark, me, Russell, me, Michael, me, Steve, who's sitting in the room, is a power a lot greater than myself. And just understanding that as like a process of being a first port of call. Like kind of what I'll say is that if you are out there and you're thinking about what they're talking about and the rest of it, I'm talking about a desire to be better, right? A desire to have, a greater understanding of what it is to be you. And in pursuit of that, not hurting people like the way that I hurt people, and I'm gone through this. I'm going through this at the moment, and like I said, guys in here know about this situation, and it's not anybody else's fault. Do you know what I mean? I'm not sitting there saying that it's your fault. If you hadn't have done this, this wouldn't have happened, and the rest of it. I've managed to kind of take responsibility. And if you'd have turned around to me, 20 odd years ago and said you'd be in this situation and you'd be able to cope in the way that you are coping, and that's not a real investment in the result. Whether, as you say, Russell, I nicked the money or didn't nick the money, that is still to be proved. But and we'll leave that. We'll leave that to the legal channels to point out.
It just happened to drop into that program.
We'll leave that to the legal. We'll leave that to the legal framework to work out whether I am or not. It's kind of my job to kind of deal. It's my job to deal with the consequences of that, and with a power grant myself, this program, it's kind of, so that's where I am. And, and as I say, the further I've gone into this, the greater the kind of challenge. It has got narrower, but I also think that my ability to deal with it just through necessity and being in this program, has even surprised myself. And that's the one thing I would kind of say.
I think when Tosca was saying there is that I identify, right, in the last couple of years, I married somebody, I went through this divorce, right? I went through this divorce, it's cost me a chunk of money, right? Now,
bless you.
But the
You're
thing
not
is,
on your own,
the thing is with it, right, guys? And this is the key, I guess, for my learning is a thing, and it goes back to, like, ego, really, is that I find this attractive young woman, and she's 18 or 20 years younger than me, and she finds me attractive right now. I don't know what's going on. I don't know agendas, no rest. There could be a lot of agendas going on because she knows that I've got maybe a few quid and different properties and stuff. But taking that aside, there's a part of me knows intuitively I should not marry this woman. Right. I know I should not marry because there's something that happens on New Year's Eve. About 2 years before it, on New Year's Eve, I'm with her and her family in a place called Whitby. And I'm in this bed, and I'm there for the whole weekend with her. And I go into this jealousy. And it's core. It's really, the feeling of jealousy that I felt, the feeling of sort of trauma, really, that I felt in this, because I was stuck in this house with her family, and she'd said to me about this particular guy who was a friend of her sister's, and says, oh yeah, I remember that she said, oh, I think he's really hot, and he's like the same age as her, really attractive guy, and I'm stuck in this house with this guy for the weekend, really, and the extended family. And what happened is, at a certain point, I was in trouble. I could see I was in trouble, but I didn't do the stuff that we needed to, like phone my sponsor. I could see I was going down, and my head was racing, and I said to her, I says, you know what? I remember you said that guy. That's the guy. And she says, yeah, but don't be stupid. And she was not loving or caring or compassionate around, right? So it was my shortcoming, really, my jealousy, my fear, core fear. But she done that, and she went, and in we're round this table, and she sat really close to this guy, and she started having a dialogue, and I could see across, and I thought, she knows I'm in trouble, right? But she's not, and there was a gap where I got to speak to her in the anyway, the long and short of it was, I went right into this pain, and on my way back from Whitby, I was really close. I think I was probably really close to maybe taking a drink, or because it was 11:45, and I said to her, we're all I says, what happened? We're all playing cards, right? And I'm thinking, I can't, the pain of being around this guy and the jealousy that I'm feeling. So I say,
did you suck your belly in?
I go, I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to go to bed. She doesn't
put your knife away.
Anyway, what happens is, I wind up in this room, and she says to me, she says, well, if you don't trust me, just go, right? And this child, and it was like, and she threw the laptop across the floor, and she says, just go. And my head, and this is I said, I'm sure this is my own, it said, just leave, just go. And if I'd walked out the door, and I was in Whitby, she would have turned off the phone, and I'd left her. I'd almost created the thing that I dreaded the most, which was that I was going to be cheated on. And after that, I thought, this is not the woman, but yet I still married her. And I knew that I shouldn't marry her. But my ego just went, this is when it will be okay. It sort of compartmentalised some of these facts and just went, just go and do it. Just do it. And it will be okay. But it was going against my spirit. You know what I mean? And then when it all started going pear-shaped, I was like, the rage I felt to myself, I thought, why didn't you listen to your instinct? Why didn't you, you know? But that's been a real lesson within it as well, is like just how attached, and no matter, like always you're saying, Tosca, about the money. I work with guys all the time who are multi-millionaires, and I see they've got masses of money, but they're suicidal. They want to jump out. They're in Monaco and they want to jump out a penthouse, you know, like out the window. And so I know that it doesn't fix me, but some part of me still chases it all the time, whether it's prestige or money or not so much women. And I don't at all women now because I'm in a relationship, but it still thinks there's something else better across there.
Isn't it becoming, what I'm trying to learn and what is becoming clear to me is that there is some kind of unfolding, and that I've created in the various forms of my addiction lessons for myself. I'm getting a lot of identification from listening to all of you. Like when I recognise that a lot of the trajectory of my life was trying to create for myself and for others a kind of impression that I'd learned from the culture, I suppose. I bet all of us, one way or another, are enamoured of and admired the great George Best, the genius and alcoholic. And I can remember once seeing a photograph of myself coming out of a nightclub in sunglasses with two really, really attractive women, and sort of seeing the photograph of myself and thinking, look, you are it now. You are it now. And then I also remember
the reality of what happened like that night, and sort of how it was like it wasn't a fulfilling experience, but the image is still somehow so alluring and so seductive. I remember too often recognizing that I am nominating a person I'm in a relationship to function as a kind of God for me. You make me all right. And in a sense, it's all the better if it's evident that there is some conundrum or dilemma in that relationship that's almost irresolvable. Because then I think, well, if you are actually marrying me, then I must have overcome that feeling that I had that I wasn't good enough and that it wasn't right. Because if you are going to accept me, then ta-da, I've resolved it. I've done it. And the lesson that I'm really, really trying to accept now is that in each of these instances, in the pursuit of an ideal and trying to form myself into some sort of cultural artifact, or nominating another person to somehow resolve me, I'm avoiding the truth that all of us are lucky enough to have explained to us when we come into this program, that it's a spiritual solution that is required. That, if it's step 12 is having had a spiritual awakening, then the problem was always a spiritual one. And I found it such a hard lesson. I find the outside world so seductive, and I can really see how you reap what you sow. Even in instances where you're presented with a challenge, for example, a legal challenge, where resolutely you haven't done what you have been accused of doing, it's clear how behaviour and circumstances have created the conditions for that to happen.
Absolutely.
I suppose all of us are pretty lucky, aren't we, to have the opportunity through recovery to go through like transformation and to take that offering. And I can't help but thinking that we have to continue to invest in our spiritual growth. What I was certainly always willing to invest in my acquisitiveness. Like I put so much into trying to get stuff. I was always trying to get stuff. It's obvious the pendulum was going to swing back one day and hit me in the face. And what I felt like lately is like I become a Christian. No, wasn't it, mate? So what I felt like is the amplification of the message of like, this is it. You're coming this way. You're coming this way. There's no way for you. Come on. And like, because of the offering, the thing about the offering that I sort of missed, you know, when you go back to stuff in recovery and you think, oh, that was always written in there. I don't know why I didn't see that before. I don't know why I didn't see, daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of a spiritual condition. I don't know why I didn't notice that. The idea like that, what I'm seeing is death of self, resurrection of higher principle. You die that Christ might live in you. And like these things are sort of evident and obvious, if not bloody, not easy solutions.
No, not easy.
No,
it
man.
does work.
Yeah.
See, what I think, if we go into, if we break it down and say church, it's a building, If we break it down and say vicar, he's a man, or congregation. And I believe a lot of that stuff is man-made, Not everywhere, but when you look at the spiritual growth, I mean, and AA started with a Christian face, so it must have been something there. It's one of the biggest movements of recovery in the whole world. So there must be something, and I ain't trying to convert no one, but what we don't understand is when we say born-again Christian Jesus, they go, what a tart. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the devil takes you away from it. We don't have tambourines. We don't wear white socks. Now, if you take away the guy you mentioned earlier, he's a friend of mine, Nicky. And I tell you what, that man is so not religious. He's a wonderful man. And his character's changed by believing in something that I believe is true. So it's not a set of rules. It's about receiving the power, and it might sound a bit weird, I don't really care, of the Holy Spirit. And that Spirit moves us, we move around at 1,000 miles an hour, and it's been the same from day 1 hour. Why don't they fall off down in Australia? Why aren't they falling off the bottom? Why? I don't know. A woman giving birth. As much as I've had murders with my 2 ex-wives, bless them, I drove them mad. But the gift of birth when I saw my daughters being born, I thought, oh my God, it was something that moved me, that I was frightened. Now, when I was in the Nick, and this, it doesn't matter, but we started Alpha in prisons, yeah? And I was in prison with my father, yeah? I was chewed up with my dad, who was a bit wobbly, and, as well we know. But I was broken. And I started to dislike him because I could see in him who I was. So there's a thing called sins of the fathers. It's the forefathers' repeated sin, let's call it. Let's name it what it is. My grandfather committed suicide in a powerful way. My dad was who he was. And he took me down to Surrey, so I went to a nice school. That didn't work. I just couldn't cop for it. It was not right. Yeah. And so I was built, I had the sort of infection of a bad spirit, let's just call that, right? Yeah. Now, I haven't done great. I've done great in keeping clean, but my behaviour, as you know, was outrageous, yeah? And now today, because I really have taken it on board that Jesus is the Son of God, whether you like that or not, I ain't here to preach that. And it's not to be mocked, yeah? If you there's evidence that it happened, but there's also evidence that it changes who I am. And I don't knock recovery because I love meetings and I love recovery. But there's a power that the enemy don't want us to receive, because we can be aware that, I've got to go through the steps, I've got to do that, I've got to make my amends, and then go, God, out of it, or whatever. But when you get convicted of love, when you get convicted of peace, when you start to see that the brain ain't what it used to be, or the permutation of my control, my greed lost everything. My control lost everything. You know, and yet I've been gifted with wonderful children, wonderful grandchildren, and I can honestly say, today I unconditionally love them. Yeah, and I've given them a tough time. Yeah, both my wives are best friends with me. You know, and something's happening because I'm doing nothing about it but listening. So the Word of God says the soft voice. The soft voice is the powerful voice. The soft voice is the one we listen to when all around us is raging. And I think the 12 steps of recovery are absolutely fantastic. But without the power of the truth, without the power that exists, we wake up in the morning, we breathe fresh air. How's that work out? How is everything so perfect, but we're not? The existence of life is perfection. Yeah, it's untainted. And we go about like that, trying to smash it to pieces because we want a bird and a few quid or whatever. Or we want to be liked, or we don't want to be liked, or whatever it is. But this is our enemy, and the presence of now to sometimes just go, stop thinking. And the body seems to go, God, try and stop thinking for a minute. It's not hard. I do it in the bath. And I say, well, I've gone 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and I do it a lot now. So when the thought comes, instead of me manifesting my emotions or go, what's he think? I'm a mug, this geezer, or whatever, do you know what I mean? Pride, I try not to think about it. And if I don't react to it, somehow it doesn't have a substance of power in me no more. So I believe that by the Spirit of God, plus the 12 steps of recovery, has been beneficial to me. That's how I feel today. Bless you.
Yeah, thanks, chaps. Yeah, and it's really interesting when you get down to it, right? When you get right down to it, which is a song by Ronnie Dyson, great song. When you get right down to it, and it asks in step 7, right? It's ask him to remove. It's really sort of specific. It's about asking him, you know. And I have this sort of back and forth with people. Well, they're saying it's about this and it's about that and blah, blah, blah. I said, well, not really. Do you know what I mean? It's about power in itself. That's what it's about. You know, I'd like to distill it into being about something that you might recommend. Right? Do you know what I mean? I'd like for us to have an argument, and you know, we can have a back and forth, but an opinionize about all of this stuff. But it really is about that. And I think that on a really good day, that's really comforting for me. Do you know what I mean? It's really sort of like, okay, this is the meat and potatoes, right? All this other sort of stuff, the white noise and the rest of it. And, you know, me and Michael were talking about, when we were coming up, about red flags.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
And
Hey, thanks, guys. I know.
yeah, and
I know,
and
I
we
know.
were talking about red flags, right? And we were talking about red flags, and we were talking about character defects. And the character defects are, you know, what my sponsor always says to me is, deal with your character defects, or they'll kill you stone dead sober. They'll kill you stone dead clean. And I know that. Do you know what I mean? I know that, you know, I'm so full of arrogance. I'm so full of rage. I'm so, you know, my desire to be right. And we're talking, and, you know, and the one about character defects, the big one, is sloth.
Yeah.
It's like, so when I'm challenged in a particular way, will I really take on, so the red flag situation, you know, I've got another work situation where, well, we've basically got to get rid of someone from an operation. But we knew really ages ago.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
They sort of turned up with a T-shirt saying, I'm a twat. Do you know what I mean? And we thought, that T-shirt's all right. It's kind of pretty cool. And it's that, you know, and I don't necessarily know if this is about, you know, I remember Thomas Milton, that religious bloke went into Gethsemane monastery for 13 years to work out God's will, and he sort of came out after 13 years silence and said, I'm not too sure about God's will, but I know I'm closer to it. And I've always felt that, you know, it's like, you know, what do I really want for myself, right? Yeah. And if I can kind of distill it back to, you know, and you spoke really kind of eloquently there, Michael, about, you know, the process and why things exist and why they don't exist. And when I think about, you know, the 100 first men and women with the book who got together to do the book, and when I think about the 412 people who got together to put the basic text together, DNA, which is 30 years after their first meeting. Do you know what I mean? When I think about that stuff, none of that stuff's coincidence. None of that stuff's coincidental at all. And it's, for me, I need to move away from all of that other stuff that I feel motivated by and just distill it back into being about, you know, getting up, trying to connect with a power greater than myself. If I did that on a regular basis and kind of did like a dice game with it, right? Did a dice game, prayed, meditate, and I can only meditate in the summer, which is bizarre. I can't meditate in the winter, right? It's something that I'm really going to have to kind of... If I could do that on a daily basis, get given the sign and just follow that through, my life would be 200% better. 200% better. And it's about, for me, the idea of that still being a possibility, which is so great. The thing that, you know, keeps me here, keeps me coming back today and the rest of it, is that, yeah, I do have a chance and I do have a pause, I do have a gap. And it does give me a chance to be a better person. What I will say is that we're talking about, you know, us being... Obviously, I'm the cleanest person here, but yeah, we can all endorse that. If we all endorse that, you know. But it's, and the beauty of it is that I'm a lot better now. I'm a lot better now than I was, and I really realise that I might not have the stuff that I want. I might not be in, you know, I might not be in the position that that, you know, financially, you know, my physical health. You know, I've got issues with my prostate. Like, oh, man, over 50 with the prostate. Do you know what I mean? I've got high blood pressure. Do you know what I mean? You know, last summer I was out with my 20-year-old daughter and just wet myself. Do you know what I mean? Like, how fucking embarrassing is that? You know, but we're just sitting there and laughing at it. But there's enough humility about looking at the pair of us and going, you know what? This is kind of okay. Yeah, we're kind of doing this. And, you know, but years ago, if I'd have done that, you know, I just wouldn't have been able to cope with it. So I think that the fact that I'm still here and still doing this means that it is working. I might not, the results might not be exactly how I might want them to be, but I can deal with the consequences of it. Yeah. And, you know, I can. And that in itself, you know, the thing that brought me into recovery when I think about it is I couldn't deal with the consequences.
Right.
Fucking hell, do you know what I mean? I couldn't. Do you know what I mean? Like, I couldn't cope with it. It was like, no. But now, if I think about whatever happened to me out there when I was at it and whatever happened to me now, what's happened to me now has been far greater.
Yeah.
It has. So, you know, I didn't have relationships. I had held hostages, and I just grunted at people, literally. And now, you know, I am accountable. You know what I mean? I am turning up and saying, you know what, this is kind of okay. We will kind of get through this. You know, the general sort of, you know, so when I was, you know, given this letter saying, you know, all this money's been spent and we think 450 grand of it should have been. You know, I didn't get out of bed for 2 days, you know, and then I rang all my friends saying that people like Mark and Steve and that saying people accuse me, and because they love me, they go, no, you couldn't have done it. It wasn't you. They've got the wrong person and all that sort of stuff, and I felt better about it. But then finally, you know, I got out of bed, looked at it and dealt with it. You know, and dealt with it, and I'm kind of in my truth, and I suppose that, you know, anyone who is listening out there, and you know, and is struggling with the concept of addiction, what it is and what it isn't, and the rest of it, you know, it is an enlightening journey, you know, and it's told me stuff about myself that I really hate, but it's also told me stuff about myself that has been so paramount, you know, in my ability to just cope with being me. You know, I often think of myself as being like the Tasmanian devil. You know, and I can sort of walk along the street and feel myself going sort of slightly bad. You know what I mean? Like, it's on me. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, and then bang, you know, admit to myself I was powerless. You know, blah, 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 blah. You know, second step, hope. And all of a sudden, I have this antidote to me. Yeah? And it's bang. And whether it's up here or down there, do you know what I mean? It is the thing that kind of right-sizes me. And it's something really, you know, when I think of it in this sort of setting, it's really kind of quite inspiring. But sometimes it's really, really depressing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've actually worked it out. Do you know what I mean? I know what to do. And whether I kind of engage in it or not is another matter. But when I'm up against it, it really does work every time. And, you know, I've prattled on for too long, so I'm going to let Mark carry on. Let's have a free-for-all for a few minutes.
Can I just say something?
Yeah,
I hope you don't mind. So, I think about it's love. Yeah. So, love is not getting the, you know, all that sort of thing that we thought lust was. And I was a candidate for it because I didn't feel good about myself. But I'll tell you one of the things. So I don't want to bang on about Jesus, but let's just call it a person, right? Now,
Jesus.
No, but well, let's just talk about how tough he was. You know, that's not identified in the church. It was a terrible death. Yeah, smashed to pieces, not a grass, kept his mouth shut. Right. So it's a true story, whether you believe it or not.
Yes.
But there was some power in it, wasn't there, to go through that? It must have been some sort of power beyond him. So, and I think the power that I've learned, not all weird and wonderful, is about love. Yeah. So, do I love myself enough to love you? No, I didn't. Yeah. And I think love's an action. So I used to think love was, ain't she got a lovely backside? Or, God, I like her boobs. Or, gosh, I'll marry you. I don't even know what her name is. Yeah. And it was all that desire, you got to fix me. And it didn't work. So God didn't fix me, the Holy Spirit, but it taught me something about myself that once I allowed it to permutate in the being of me, it helped me. Yeah, and I don't think I'm mentally ill anymore. I don't do crime. And I'm proud of it. I'm celibate for 2 years.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So, and it's really cleansed. I still get the yawn in the morning. Is it allowed to say that?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it's all right, man.
Maybe the church would like it. No, but I'm just saying to you, so it's not about that I've become inadequate. Yeah. And I still look at birds, but don't think I'm going to marry her, or I wonder what she looks like, whatever. I have an ability to go, oh, hello, how are you? And not be messed up by what my madness wants to. So it's about abstinence, drinking drugs. But what about behaviour? What about my greed? What about my control? And where I've had to sit on my own for the last, and I ain't got the violin out, I'm glad about it, but the only person I had to really get on with for the first time in my life was me. So that was difficult. I had to learn about, and I started to like myself. I'd cook, I'd move about, I'd do me thing. Now, that is recovery. It's the recovery of the lost soul, the dirty, traumatized soul who used to shout. I used to scream when I was 3, it weren't too bad. But when I was 63, still throwing me bottle across the room to my mum, it weren't acceptable. And I had to learn how to stop it, and I couldn't stop it. So abstinence of being on my own and trusting in something, like you say, is far greater than me, it's a reality. It does work. And I don't know why, but I do know why. There's nothing I could do about it. And it was either sink or swim, except that I got cancer. I ain't accepting that. I'm going to fight it and go with it. And the only way I could, I've got a big fat mouth anyway. But I've learned, I ask God every day, I don't know if he listens to me, but to put a guard over my mouth. Why don't, the bite, I don't want to keep, but the taming of the tongue. Those things that I just took for granted.
Sure.
No, I'm rabbiting on here. I ain't seen no one, but I know, I've had a coffee and all, but I know that I can sit on my own all day in my flat and I'm all right. And if that's not recovery or God, I'm being true to them. I don't have to, I turn my phone off now. I could never turn my phone. I was addicted. I had 3 phones. I had to be talking to someone or controlling someone or having sex where I shouldn't have sex and, all that sort of stuff. And I've learnt now that women are beautiful, but they ain't what we want them to be. They're nuts. Yeah. And especially as they get a bit older or whatever. So what I try to do is keep away because I am absolutely useless in relationships. I'm too Bob. Me, I, and all that. So because I haven't been in a relationship, I don't seem to have a problem with women. The problems I've had, it ain't been too cool. But today, in the nothingness, I feel there's plenty. I think there's plenty in the nothingness.
Do you know, it's funny, that motorbike outside. Right?
And I do love recovery.
That motorbike. See, I go to get that motorbike, in Swindon, I see an advert and I get the bike, right? I go to the guy's house, I get the bike, and he's a Marine, right? He's built like that. He's stand there, and then he says, there's the bike, and I pay the money on the app. And then I look across at the ignition key of the bike, and it's an NA badge. It's a Narcotics Anonymous badge. And I says to him, how do you go to NA? I mean, of all the people that are advertising, and he goes, no, the guy who sold me the bike, gave the keys and that's on the gate. And I had this moment, I just thought, it's like one of these, although, because I waver all the time in my belief around, because sometimes I'm like quantum physics and is there a God? Are we just going, so I waver continually. I'm agnostic, I would say. And then I do recognise that there's been loads of serendipitous things that's happened. I mean, there's so many of them, right, where I've thought the chances of that happening are so, I mean, it's 1 in a million or something, but yet, and then I get this moment, I go, oh, right, this is God's way of keeping his anonymity. So, because I remember that saying, and it's funny with the whole fellowship because the pain that we're all in, when we all came here, when we're all at the end of our addiction, isn't it? We're all in the same absolute pain. And then we get sort of, it doesn't take long. We get clean, we get sober, we get the love. I think what I recognise is I felt a love and a sense of belonging when I went to the fellowship and or fellowships. But also I can see how, and I've watched my friends over the years who have picked up, and what's mad about it is I've seen them pull away from the source really that's keeping them clean, and their ego, they get stuff, they get whatever it is that they think that they want, and I don't need to be involved in recovery anymore, and they go to less meetings, and they're not getting the sort of input, and then they make a decision to have a drink, and the next thing, it doesn't happen overnight that they go straight back. But and what's crazy about it for me is like both my friends who are dead now, who one at 10 years and one at 14 years picked up. The one at 10 years, I'd go and see him, and I used to know him from the street. We used to have fight. We used to be down in Brixton. We used to be smoking crack, and we used to wind up in fights and all that with different people. And when he picked up a drink, I remember I was sitting in these things. I says, Ray, it looks like you're getting away with it. Like you can drink. And he says, and because he really cared about me, he loved me. He says, believe me, Mark, I am not getting away. What your perception of what's happening is different from the reality. You can't see because I could just see that he could go out and have a couple of pints, whereas before we'd be smoking crack and cans of Tennant Super, and it'd be like mayhem. He looked as if he was having a couple of ciders. He was still going to his work. He was waking up in the morning. He was holding down the relationship. But what I couldn't see was the obsession of the mind. And my illness was doing press ups. Was like going, oh look, I've this is all bullshit. My head was going, the whole 12 I've been duped. Right, my head was saying the whole thing about you've got to do this, you've got to go to meetings, you've got to get a sponsor, you've got to, my illness was going, keep stum about this because you can have a drink, you can have it, but what the fellowships told me is keep being honesty is the antidote. I've got to be ruthlessly with some other, whether it's Russell or you, Mike, or Tosca. Just I need to share the exact nature of my illness, right? And my illness is, or say I'm thinking of growing doing a weed farm or whatever it might be, right? I mean, all the things that go on in my head, regardless of how long I've been clean.
We have done that. We've done that. We sat down.
Yeah.
Like, no, I remember talking about doing some fraud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aye.
And I sort of said, Mark, I think that's fraudulent. Do you remember that? With the mortgages, and it was like, oh well, yeah, right.
Aye.
And but you don't. But we didn't. But we didn't know. Do you know what I mean? We kind of knew.
Yeah.
But the thinking is we're always one step ahead. Yeah. This is always, it's going to benefit me. And it's that kind of process, process addiction, right? It's kind of like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to feel better. It's that kind of instant hit. And I can remember us sitting there and go, we get this fella and blah, 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 and we get this ball. And then I remember saying, we was going, well, that's actually fraudulent. You can't actually do that. And we're in long-term recovery, plotting to get fraudulent mortgages and not really kind of understanding it because we kind of sleepwalked ourselves into it. Yeah. And that's the beauty.
Yeah. I can see how you can get into them kind of dilemmas as a matter of fact because... Right. One of the things I think about recovery is there's sometimes a sense, both in both of the major substance or beverage fellowships, that it's even though this ain't said explicitly in the literature other than in one leaflet, that it's a bridge for normal living, that it's somehow preparing you to go back to the normal world. And one of the things that we're free to talk about here in a way that we wouldn't necessarily were we to be within the confines of a group is that all of our addictions exist within a certain cultural context that does emphasise, amplify certain ideas like that crime is glamorous as hell, that womanising is magnificent and fantastic, and that having like fast cars and motorbikes is cool as all heck. And like in a way, I think that if I'd have known at the beginning of recovery that what I was giving up wasn't drugs and alcohol, it was giving up myself. I don't know that I weren't ready for that message because I didn't receive that, and that message is in there from the get-go. They're telling you you're going to give up yourself. Like the brilliant American speaker, Sandy B, says that thing, like after a couple of years, his sponsor says, oh, you might want to stop the embezzling. And right, so it's don't drink, don't embezzle. And you might want to stop the affair. Right, so don't drink, don't embezzle, don't have affairs. And then what I come to, obviously what I suppose the conclusion that a lot of us reach sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, is that you've got to give up the entirety of the self. We talked about a few things, haven't we? Like the gate is narrow, but feels like you can get with it with a power greater than yourself that you wouldn't be able to on your own. That there are red flags everywhere. That it don't matter how long you're doing this, there are still going to be temptations and distractions. Yeah. But what I feel like sometimes is, like, one of my justifications sometimes is, I don't like this culture. I don't agree with its rules. I don't agree with its laws. I don't like, not with obvious moral principles about other people's freedom, but when I feel like what I'm dealing with is that's some sort of corporate state power. They're ripping us off the whole time. I don't agree with any of that. I want to oppose that. I feel like that's mission. That is the duty to oppose that power. They've kept us down long enough. They try not to let us get educated. They're terrified of our power. They're terrified of us awakening. And I can use a lot of ways to talk myself into danger, I suppose. And that's sometimes I wonder where the surrender goes. Like for a while ago, I was thinking, would I be generally, like, say with like a simple thing like driving and parking regulations and driving laws, speed limits, whatever. Would I be happier if I just went, well, that's what the speed limit says, so that's what I'll drive at. I won't think, I didn't impose that law, I'll decide for myself. I don't need to obey a red traffic light if it's dead of night. I don't need to obey laws when they're irrelevant. I understand the rule behind it. There's some sort of calling for freedom, and the same as I feel like there's a calling for God. There's like, who are all these intercessions, all these intermediaries that are putting themselves between us and God? All these people that are saying, you've got to go this way, you can't stand here, you can't do that. And sometimes I find that becomes self-will, and I like your point earlier, mate, about like some monastic living, the celibacy, the recognising all of the many tetherings and tendrils that tie me to this world, and how many of them I can snip is how free I can be. But I still want to sort of somehow acknowledge that we're not doing this in a neutral or even spiritually encouraged environment. Like, I think there is a lot of dark power in high places.
Absolutely.
Demonic power. Crooked.
The old world's crooked.
A little bit Auntie Maud would be wrong under them circumstances.
How can you trust these people going around killing kids? Ukraine, out there in Gaza. We do it, we're murderers. They're all crooked, it's all crooked money. They're all at it, but they live in a culture that says, I'm a member of parliament, are you? Do you know what I mean? The infiltration of paedophilia is everywhere. And they go, you're breaking the law, are we? We get sentenced to jail by lawbreakers.
So I wonder what we do with that rebellious spirit, Mark.
Just love ourselves.
That's
all we've got to do.
We've got to direct it, haven't we? We've got to direct it.
I've had a great time, I have.
It's been lovely, isn't it?
I've enjoyed myself.
It's been chair after chair after chair.
Yeah. So I'm done now.
Look, and I guess we just want to say is, if there's anybody, look, we're doing this podcast, and if there's anybody out there, who is suffering from addictions, just know, right, that there's a solution. We've been talking, and also to know that as much as we can talk about problems in daily lives and the later problems of recovery, the freedom that we've experienced, the freedom from the bondage yourself, and the freedom that we get, and to live our life. And that's what the very beginning, when Roland Hazard came to see Carol Jung sent Roland Hazard off and said, you suffer from a spiritual malady and you need to go to the Oxford. This was initially at the very beginning. The Oxford group says you need to go to the Oxford group, and as a result of that, then two men, Bill and Bob, wound up, speaking with each other, and the whole thing's created from it, which is incredibly powerful, isn't it? And so that if there's people that are really suffering, know that there's a solution and there's help there, and reach out. And you can't do it on your own. You can do it on your own for a period of time, but generally self-will's not enough. We need other people to help us get by.
Nice one, Mark.
Nice one, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay.